Ravenswatch is an excellent game with a very challenging skill curve. While I thoroughly enjoy the game now, there are moments when I found it so punishing I nearly quit. One major hurdle is mastering map navigation and prioritizing camps. Even after becoming comfortable with basic hero mechanics and cooldowns, understanding how to efficiently navigate and scale my character required significant effort. If you're just starting out, I've distilled some of the basics to help you progress more smoothly and avoid the frustrations I experienced. And if you're an experienced player, feel free to share additional tips for newcomers in the comments section. A few disclaimers about this guide: I prioritize leveling up, acquiring items, and exploring over strictly optimal play. So if you're aiming to speedrun Ravenswatch, this guide might not be the best fit for you. However, if you prefer exploring the map and quickly leveling up your talents, you'll find this guide helpful. I'm focusing solely on Chapter 1 because it's where you'll spend the most time, and a strong early game is crucial for success later on. I may cover Chapter 2 in future content. It's worth noting that I primarily play solo on Nightmare difficulty, so some tips may not apply if you're playing on a different difficulty level or in co-op. Nevertheless, the general principles should be applicable across the board. This guide will explain what to prioritize in the early, mid, and late phases of the first chapter, and what to expect in the Chapter 1 boss fight. I'd also like to introduce this topic with a few overarching principles. First, always prioritize pathing and camps that increase your character's power level in your current phase of the game. This can mean tackling smaller camps early on and saving harder camps for later stages of the game. It can also mean skipping some easy camps which give you resources that aren't as useful to the late game, and sometimes taking a more difficult camp early, though not if it's likely that you'll lose a Raven Feather for it. The second principle is to avoid unnecessary fights, especially when no objectives are at stake. Meaningless skirmishes in the middle of the map, particularly early on, can significantly hinder your progress. Keep moving. In the later stages of the chapter, you might be able to defeat an enemy with a single ability and in stride on the way to your next objective. And if you've reached that point, it's okay to snack on a creep here and there for XP. But remember that creeps at Nightmare difficulty give 40% less XP. Objectives are going to do the most for your run, not defeating enemies. Now that those principles are out of the way, let's shift our focus from broad principles to specific strategies for the different stages of the chapter, starting with the early game. The clock doesn't start until you leave the spawn or aggro a creep, so take a moment after spawning in to examine your map and decide on a route. At this point, there are several priorities you could consider. Some players opt to clear the area immediately around the spawn to collect large dreamshards. This is an opportune time to do so since you're currently weaker than you'll ever be in the game, and taking these shards comes at a relatively small opportunity cost. Despite these points, I find taking shards around the spawn unappealing since it's time consuming and the shards you get will only sit in your inventory until the mid to late game, and won't scale your character in an immediate significant way. However, there's an exception. If one of the mini bosses is close to my starting spawn, I'll take a moment to scout around for nearby keys. This saves time later, and character speed usually doesn't scale as much as damage, so you probably won't be able to find the key any faster later on than if you decide to do so right away. Another way of thinking of it is in terms of your damage potential. Looking for keys early if it doesn't affect your pathing too negatively is better than looking for them late when your power level would let you easily take a camp instead. Some players have dug deeper into understanding the key spawning mechanic, see the link in the description, but the basic idea is that keys spawn within a certain radius of the mini-boss. By keeping this in mind early on, you'll naturally path through that area, saving time in the late game when every second not spent on objectives comes at a very high opportunity cost. You'll notice that a few green objectives are highlighted as you prepare to leave spawn. These green objectives spawn closest to your starting point and provide a means to begin power scaling in the early game. Yellow objectives will spawn beyond green ones, and red ones will be the furthest away. Generally, the most formidable enemies and greatest rewards lie furthest from your spawn. If you encounter a green vision tower, I'd recommend prioritizing it over chests and crystals. Why? Not just for the vision. I used to intentionally leave the vision camp for last so they would illuminate the areas farther from me, providing me with the most valuable information, but I've realized that the extra vision is actually the secondary benefit of taking this camp. The main one is a 225 XP boost, which will help you quickly reach level 2. Talents play a significant role in boosting your power in the game, plus you'll gain a base 10% increase in your damage and health upon leveling up. This boost can feel quite significant when clearing camps. In general, the first few XP levels are also the easiest to get, so playing for XP mainly from level 1 to 3.5 or 4 is a pretty valid strategy. Apart from vision towers, another thing to be mindful of is attempting to skip from green camps to yellow camps. Some yellow camps are easier for certain characters than certain green camps, so it can be worth it to skip to taking yellow camps pretty quickly. However, it will take experience on your character to know which camps are easy to take and which ones are hard. There are some yellow camps you really shouldn't risk losing a raven feather to early in the chapter. There are also some which, although you could take, would be pretty time consuming because your character's damage is too low and you'll have to kite for too long. In those cases, there's a good chance that taking a green camp first could increase your damage output, thus helping you clear the yellow camp more quickly. Moving away from broader pathing to your build philosophy, you should prioritize acquiring aggressive talents and items that immediately boost your damage output. Later in the game, you might be more conservative, choosing items based on their overall utility and whether they enhance your ability to play safely. But for now, it's all about accelerating without restraint. Safer and more cautious item choices are aimed at preserving a good run, but early on you have nothing to lose, so don't hold back. Once you've dealt with the vision and chest camps, you might consider tackling a green shard camp, but steer clear of grimoires of any color. Those are reserved for the late game. However, do locate the teleporter spots close to grimoires, as this will facilitate quick and efficient travel when the time comes to connect with them. Identifying TP spots is crucial for minimizing backtracking. If you find yourself venturing deep into unexplored parts of the map and need to TP back to tackle easier camps, prioritize finding a TP spot first. This will save you time later when you need to return to that area of the map. And by the way, you should TP frequently. TPs are kind of like elevators. People are always trying to pressure you into taking the stairs and getting exercise, but taking the elevator is just way faster and it's more efficient. It's the same with TPs. Use them any time that they decrease the amount of time you spend walking, even if it's just to get over a wall. I've mentioned exploring grimoires, but there are a few other things on the map that you might be curious about, and I want to take a second to bring them up. You might see a few wishing wells scattered around the map. I generally wouldn't fight for those in Chapter 1. The issue with them is that they require dream shards to obtain items, which competes with leveling up your talents. While there are instances where you might accumulate a substantial amount of dream shards, as occasionally happens with Hope Diamond in Chapter 2, those tend to be the exception rather than the rule. Just as a reference, wishing wells offer 3 items each, costing 150, 250, and 350 dream shards respectively, for a total of 750 dream shards if you acquire the entire set. That might be good value sometimes, but that's rarely the case in Chapter 1, so don't lose sleep over it. You will also pass some healing fountains while traveling the map. One of the pure joys Ravenswatch has to offer is the satisfaction of sneaking up and stealing a healing fountain before creeps can see you. But in all honesty, you can waste a lot of time if you focus on that too much. Healing fountains give you 10 vitality each time you use one, giving you 10% more HP, but they also heal you to full, making them a great tool to keep your momentum going between camps. You should try to use them strategically to heal as well as to get a vitality boost. Last tip for the early game. When exploring the map, keep in mind that camps are distributed fairly predictably in terms of density. If a large area remains unexplored, there's a camp there without fail. Conversely, if an area already contains a camp, another camp won't spawn in that same area behind a small obstruction. Camps require a predictable amount of space to spawn within. Around level 2.5 to 3, assuming you're playing on Nightmare difficulty, you've officially entered the mid-game, and it's time to consider the side quest. Taking the side quest isn't the only way to kick off the mid-game, but I find it generally offers good value. If you head to the side quest icon on the map, you'll encounter one of 3 pigs, each with an unfinished straw, wood, or stone house. Upon interacting with a pig, a timer will commence, and you'll need to gather all of the materials required to complete the house before the countdown ends. Additionally, icons will appear on the map indicating where to retrieve the necessary materials. Straw is scattered around as raw materials at marked locations on the map, guarded by enemies you must defeat to collect it. Similarly, wood can be found lying around, but the majority of the raw materials for the wood house are obtained by defeating treants, who drop wood upon death. Those marked spots often coincide with camps, which is advantageous because you likely engage with those camps anyway. By completing the objective, you not only gather materials, but also obtain items, shards, or vision. However, if you clear a camp that was designated as a raw material spot before starting the objective, the monsters will respawn, although the chests, shards, or vision they guarded won't, meaning you'll have to fight in that same spot twice. While this can be annoying, sometimes it's unavoidable, and you can still have a successful run, albeit not optimal. The stone house operates differently. Instead of obtaining materials from existing camps, quarry entrances will spawn on the map, and you'll need to venture underground to collect stone. Stone quarries solely contain monsters in stone, making the stone house less optimal than the other houses. Once you've gathered the raw materials, you aren't required to immediately return to the house. In fact, if you have more than a minute and a half left on the timer, I'd recommend attempting to find and clear another camp before returning. Doing so allows you to slightly increase your power level, hopefully boosting your damage and making it easier to defend the house. However, be careful because sometimes monsters lurk close to the TP next to the house, and there's nothing worse than having a monster aggro on you when trying to turn in materials as time runs out. Don't ask me how I know. Upon turning in the materials, you'll earn 150 XP per 5 materials. Don't turn all of the materials in before you're ready though, as the fight to protect the house will commence once all materials are deposited. The house's HP corresponds to the amount of materials you return, so even if you don't manage to collect all 15, you still have a decent chance of defending it if you're close. Avoid wasting time gathering more than 15 materials, as it won't yield any additional benefits. Interestingly, the wood and straw houses have the same HP as a stone house, but don't think too hard about that. The fight is fairly straightforward. Enemies will spawn and attack both you and the house, typically targeting whoever is closest. The specific types of enemies can vary considerably, and there have been instances where I've struggled due to unfavorable matchups. However, as long as you're diligent about drawing enemy aggro away from the house and play cautiously, you should be able to extend most fights long enough to wear down the attackers. Upon successfully defending the house, you'll receive a legendary from the pig you defeated. Congratulations, the side quest is now complete. Finishing the side quest will roughly coincide with getting level 4, again if you're playing on Nightmare difficulty. At this stage, the game is more about shards, grimoires, and mini-bosses. Grimoires have some unique mechanics. Once activated, they spawn a group of enemies, whom you must defeat in 1 minute, or else a grimoire will fail and you won't get anything for your trouble. If you do beat them, you can choose between 3 rewards: dreamshards, XP, or talent levels, which is the option I generally recommend choosing. Shards and grimoires go hand in hand, because grimoires allow you to get talent levels without paying for them. Green, yellow, and red grimoires allow you to level up your talents 2, 3, and 4 rarity respectively. Before the Dark Tales update, you generally had 2 grimoires, but since the Altar of Heroes was added to the game, you may only get 1. This means that you can get between 2 and 6 free levels from grimoires on any given map. To help you understand how impactful optimal grimoire play can be, consider this example situation. Suppose you have a red and a green grimoire, so a total of 6 rarity levels. Suppose you also were able to get enough dream shards to upgrade your talents, 2 to epic and 2 to rare. Then once you've completed both grimoires, you'll have all your talents on legendary, and best part, you didn't have to pay dream shards for them. Upgrading talents to rare is 50 dream shards, epic is 100, and legendary is 200, so how many dream shards did you save? 1,000. From those 2 grimoires, 1,000 dream shards worth of value. That is insane. Of course, you might be racing the clock at this point in the game, and there are so many bosses on the map. Should you prioritize them over grimoires? That's really up to you, and there's a chance that due to time, you might be able to get 1 grimoire and a mini-boss, which could be better than both grimoires. However, the boss fight might be a dud if you struggle to find the key quickly or run out of time during the fight. But if you took a little time to explore early, you're more likely to have a key, and you should be nearing your maximum potential level in the game, so your damage against the mini-bosses is almost as high as it can be. On the mini-boss fight itself, there are 2 possible mini-bosses for Chapter 1. One is a giant ghoul, and the other is a giant white lady, both similar to smaller creeps you fought before, but with larger movement sets. The ghoul spawns underground, and the white lady is summoned into a large open area similar to a grimoire. Of the 2, I find the white lady the most difficult. Unless you're able to burst her quickly, she summons a bunch of white ladies and disappears so you defeat them. It's also a timed fight, similar to a grimoire, and if it takes you longer than 2 minutes to beat her, which is already disastrously long, she disappears and you don't get anything from the fight. By contrast, the ghoul boss spawns underground, and you can just run past the ghouls in the entrance and confront him. He doesn't have an escape mechanic like a timer or a boss phase. Time is usually tight by this stage of the game, so a quick mini-boss is ideal. Last of all, tumors. To be transparent, I'm not an expert on tumors. Some people in the community swear by them because they give you a lot of XP, as well as skimming off 20% of the boss's health bar before the fight starts. They might be right, but personally, I much prefer fighting camps and getting things that scale my character rather than just making the boss fight easier. It's kind of a lame way to win in my opinion, and maybe that's my Risk of Rain 2-ness showing through. I always loop. Also, tumors spawn a ton of cultists and they're the worst, so another reason not to like tumors. The bottom line is, if you like taking them, go for it, but I would only do it if I've cleared the rest of the map. Ideally, you'll have level 5 by the time you get to the boss, but if you're level 4.5, that's still fine. You might have just prioritized a certain item over the level. Again, it might not be optimal, but it really doesn't matter much either way as far as the boss fight is concerned. When you're about to finish the chapter, you might want to go to the shop and pick up some consumables. I haven't looked deeply into consumables, but if you contextualize them in terms of talents and legendary items, they're pretty good. I don't prioritize them over getting talent levels, but if you have a little extra cash at the end of the chapter, go ahead. I'll probably put out more content another time to try to help understand them better. The boss fight in Ravenswatch can be very humbling to your run. Even if you've done everything right so far, a little unfamiliarity or hesitation on your part could quickly ruin your run, so don't be surprised if it takes some getting used to. The boss sits in the middle of the arena and has 75% damage resistance, so good luck trying to attack him directly. Additionally, tentacles spawn around him, trying to slap you into the ground like a nail. They're fairly easy to juke once you've gotten used to their animations, but the Master Nightmare sitting in the middle keeps it fresh by spamming his attacks as well. He has 3: Lightning, which appears as circles on the ground which you should avoid, arrows that pulse outward from the body, and Divide, which is a massive red AoE appearing all over the arena. If you don't move out of it in time, you'll probably just die instantly. This AoE also goes through intangibles, so don't think you can just dodge it with a well-timed ability. The boss will be stunned and loses damage resistance when you defeat all of his tentacles, so usually you want to focus them first. Be careful of the tentacle pools that form from defeated tentacles, however. These do damage over time, even through intangible. I would recommend making certain you have your highest damage cooldowns when you stun the boss to ensure that you do as much damage as possible. It always feels frustrating when you stun the boss and you have to wait a few seconds before you can do significant damage. But don't let yourself get baited into dying because you greeted for a cooldown, which is a mistake I make fairly often. When the boss gets to 50% HP, the day-night cycle changes, which is significant for heroes who have different night-day characteristics. What cycle you're on starting the boss fight will determine what it was prior to the boss fight, usually day first, but if you chose to start the fight early, you might start on the night side of the cycle. If we think of every time we stun a boss as a phase, it may take several phases to wear the boss down. Sometimes you might get the boss very low, but not quite finish him before his stagger status ends. In those cases, you can attack him directly to do that last bit of damage. How well this boss fight goes tends to be a litmus test for how the rest of the run will be. As a rule of thumb, being able to 2-phase the boss is a pretty good sign. 3 is also decent, 4 is starting to get a little worrying, and heaven help you if it takes 5 phases. You might get to chapter 2, but you probably won't have the best time. But if you'd like to focus on the positive, yes, you did beat the boss. And that's all there is to chapter 1. That's all for this guide. Let me know if you found it helpful, and I'll see you next time.